Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am thrilled you're here. I'm also incredibly thrilled to have JC Andrijeski, Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of more than 31 books here on the show today. She writes in science fiction, paranormal, cyberpunk-like, urban fantasy genres, and recently she's been doing mysteries. And I love her work, so I'm super excited that she's here on the show. I got to tell you, many of her books have sort of these extended series like the Quentin Black psychic detective books or her latest Nick Tanaka vampire detective books. Her books are sexy, gritty, romantic, often dystopian. And in a word, I find her books page turners. You can't put it down. You want to know what happens next. And the sex and the romance just sizzle. So I'm so glad to welcome her to the show because she and I seldom get a chance to talk. But I also can't wait to dig into how she develops her ideas for these intense, involved stories that all weave into one another. And if you have ever wanted to write your book, I have something special just for you. As a bonus for listening to the episode and being part of the Creative Mindset family, I have my Start Writing Your Book workbook that you can grab right here. You can download it off the show notes page and finally get started on writing your book. You have a story to tell, and we want to read it. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome JC Andrijeski. Welcome, JC. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hey, yeah, no, I'm happy to be here.
I can't believe it. This is so exciting.
It's always weird to hear yourself being introduced, you know?
It's really fun for me, too, because we've known each other for a number of years. We met many years ago at a pitch and shop.
I was trying to think of that. Wasn't it like 10 years ago at least?
At least, yeah. So And we were both pitching books that we have since released, which I think is great. But it's also developed that, over drinks in New York City bars, we developed a lovely friendship. So I am super excited to finally, after all these years, have you on the podcast. This is great. And I want to jump right in. I love the fact that all your books interweave with one another, or at least so many of them, from the Bridge and Sword series to Quentin Black to Nick Tanaka. I would love it if you could take me through how you do that. How do you weave them together?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. It sort of just evolves that way. It's funny. You and I were kind of talking briefly about brand earlier, and this is part of what my brand was. It just sort of developed very organically. And I started off with kind of like what I almost consider like the meta series at this point, which is the Bridge and Sword world. And that's almost like an origin story for everything that comes after it. And but I didn't write it that way. You know what I mean? Like I wrote it as, I have this arc in my head and I really need to get it out. And I mean, that was a story that I've been thinking about since like my late teens. And I got to the end of it and people asked me if I was going to do any kind of spinoff or anything like that, because I had fans of the series and I hadn't really intended it, but I had another series in mind and I realized, they could be linked very easily, even though the characters are completely new and different. And that was the Quentin Black series. He doesn't show up really in the Ali's War, Bridge and Sword world at all, but he's connected, tenuously to that world because he was born there. So it just sort of kept going from there. And Nick Tanaka is actually a much closer connection to the Quentin Black world since he was a character in those books. But again, I didn't plan for him to have his own series. I got to a certain point in the Quentin Black books and, his storyline kind of veered in a way that I went, he could carry his own series of books. So, and it was something I wanted to write. So it's all been very organic, I guess, is the short answer.
That's terrific. I love that you can say that because to me, I have a brain that needs to plan things out. So having something be organic feels a little strange. I wrote a fiction story when I was 12, and that was the only fiction I wrote for the better part of 3 decades after that. I wrote a little story about a girl named April Winters when I was 12 years old, and nothing was organic about it. I planned every single instant of that one little short story. So to hear you say you're able to do it organically across over 30 books, it's amazing. And
well, that's a great divide, isn't it, with creative writers? Because you're either a plotter or a pantser. That's how they usually talk about it in author world, you know? And I'm a 100% pantser. Like I'm somebody, I sit down and I get into the character's head and the character tells the story. And often I don't know where it's going, you know?
is it comfortable for you to do that? In other words,
so much fun. Yeah, to me it kills it. I have plotted things before, like because I write nonfiction too, and I'm a pretty heavy outliner when it comes to nonfiction. And I have plotted a few books, just more to experiment than anything. But it honestly, that's where I sort of lose interest because I like that process of discovery. Like to me, that's really kind of the fun part of writing. So, but yeah, I have plotter friends that think I'm crazy. They're like, why would you do that to yourself? You know? So it really is a different way of writing, you know?
It really is. And you know, it's really funny. When I was writing my first fiction books, when things happened that were sort of pantser type events in the book, it was uncomfortable. I'm like, wait, I didn't expect that to happen. Wait, what? How did that happen? And then I had to almost go back and make it make sense inside my own head. But what was interesting is that when I wrote book 2 in the series, some of the things that happened in book 1 that were that more organic aspect finally got resolved. And I went, oh, that's what happened. And that's when I was able to make sense of what happened in the first book that I didn't expect to carry through because I didn't plan for it.
I totally relate to that. Yeah, I had things happen in book 1 of the Bridge and Sword series. That series especially was I had a very strong idea of where it was going. Like I had the image for the end of book 10 in my head when I started book 1. So it's not that I don't know anything. Like I often know sort of what's going to happen in terms of like, I get like a picture almost in my head of like, okay, that's the final scene. I don't exactly know what it means, but that's where they need to end up, you know? And then maybe I'll get little pieces of like scenes all the way through. But generally speaking, there's huge gaps where I don't know how it's going to get there and stuff. And often, like you said, I would have things happen in book 2 or 1 or 3 that didn't really resolve until book 10. And to me, that's almost like the magic of writing. Like, it's just so weird how your subconscious works, you know? It's just bizarre. Like my subconscious is much smarter than I am. Just flat out. Like it draws connections to things that I'm not consciously able to juggle, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And to me, in my nonfiction work, a lot of what I talk about is exactly what you just said, that your subconscious is a lot smarter, it knows more, and it's always trying to do right by you. So the more it can do what it needs to do, in other words, the more you get out of your own way, the more you're going to be able to succeed on the path you're supposed to be walking because your subconscious knows it. So I completely understand what you're talking about. But something you said kind of made me go, you said you started thinking about this book when you were a kid. Did you always write fiction, or were you, because I seem to recall that you have a journalism background, were you always writing fiction alongside it? And if not, what got you into writing fiction?
Oh, I started writing fiction way before journalism. Like, I was actually writing fiction when I was like pretty much as soon as I could write, like 6, 7 years old. I think my first book was first grade or second grade. I won some little prize for a book I wrote about dogs who escaped from their owners. It was called like Thunder Hill or something. It had some really melodramatic title. I was super dramatic about stuff. And I would record stories on cassette tapes. Like I would just talk into cassette tapes. And it was kind of funny. One of my ex-boyfriends found a couple of those tapes and was just hugely entertained by them. And I hadn't seen him in probably, 30 years or 20 years or something. And yeah, so I've always kind of told stories. I started off telling them verbally to my brother and sister on camping trips and things. And yeah, like writing them down as soon as I could. Journalism was actually something I didn't really get into until high school. I was on the school paper. And so I did a little bit there, and then I did a little bit in college, and then I freelanced for a little while after that. But I never really made a real living at journalism. It was just something I had a lot of interest in, just mostly for ideological reasons, I have to say. I was really fascinated by that whole idea of, the muckraker journalist. And I was really fascinated by Woodward and Bernstein and loved that All the President's Men. And Yeah, it was more of a social justice kind of thing to me. And like, once I kind of found out the realities of modern journalism and sort of the corporate environment and stuff, I somewhat lost interest in terms, but I still did some freelance work in my 20s and 30s.
So do you take any of that and put it into your fiction? In other words, I guess the way I'd say it is, from your journalism background, from the work that you did there, did any of it? And if so, how does it infuse your writing now? Where do you get your inspiration?
Oh, world events definitely are a huge inspiration. My background, actually, my education was in political science, and most of that was on the political history side of it versus, the electoral side of it. I studied a lot about power dynamics over the years, especially in relation to like religious movements, social movements, slave and ex-slave societies. Like, I was really fascinated by movements of people and what caused people to, rise up or be complacent or in different things. And all of that is definitely fed into my fiction quite a bit. I was particularly fascinated by slavery for different reasons, and World War II for similar reasons, actually. A lot of it had to do with, sort of power dynamics between different groups of people and caste systems. So that stuff's definitely showed up in my fiction. I actually think that part of the reason I didn't go on in academia was that I wanted to be able to write fiction, but I wanted to keep learning all those things. So writing fiction kind of gave me an excuse to always be in school. So I read voraciously in nonfiction even now. But in terms of actually writing fiction versus nonfiction, the process is completely different. Like, when I was a journalist, I plotted everything. Like, everything was very tightly organized and scripted. It's almost like a different part of my brain in a way, but it also bleeds when I write fiction. So it feeds into characters. And like, one of my characters in Bridge and Sword, as you know, he was in World War II because their species lives forever. So it got me talking about the Nazis. And then because it was an alternate history, I was able to bring in all this other weird race stuff. And so there's definitely elements of that. I try to keep it fairly open-ended in terms of, I don't make political statements in my writing for the most part. I just try to put situations out and give people the opportunity to think about them, I don't tend to do a whole lot of like soapboxing, I guess you could say. I don't know a non-offensive way to put it, because I do like issue fiction. It's not that I think it's a bad thing. It's just not something I prefer to write. I'd rather let people figure it out on their own. So
that makes a lot of sense, actually, because then you can let people sort of come to their own conclusions, but you do give them the opportunity to do some critical thinking.
Yeah. And I've never had anybody. It's interesting to me, the different spectrum of belief systems of my readers, because they're kind of all over the map. There's probably more in sort of the progressive liberal camp, but I think that honestly they're kind of all over. So it's interesting to hear what people take out of what I put out there. You know what I mean? It's definitely not uniform. But
do you get a lot of feedback that way? Do your fans contact you and let you know?
No, not really. I mean, I keep my reading group apolitical, but I kind of the normal, don't talk politics, don't talk religion kind of thing, like kind of try to, let's keep this a civilized kind of, chill environments. But occasionally I get stuff from people, but it doesn't tend to be political so much. Like, I had a number of vets write me and tell me that they felt touched by stuff that I'd written, because a lot of my characters are vets or in the military. And my father has a military background, and there's some friends of mine do as well. So I've never been in the military myself, but it was nice to know that I was able to capture that to some degree. And we didn't really talk politics, but a few did mention that it had effects on their PTSD, some of my writing, which I thought was really fascinating and kind of, flattering and touching. I was really touched that I was able to have any kind of impact on them on that level. But in terms of politics, not so much. I mean, once or twice, I think it maybe has come up, but not that often, really. Like, less than I would have expected, given some of the stuff I write about, But again, like you said, most of the novels about the characters and the love story and the situation in terms of them trying to, either solve a mystery or, get out of a death-defying situation. So it's probably not one of those things that people think about consciously so much as maybe, kind of seeps into their understanding of the world and the story.
That's interesting that you say that, because yes, I obviously get the romance and the love aspects of the books, but there's always a layer. There are multiple layers on your books. There's the layer that is sort of the magical, mystical aspect of your writing, but also there is a layer of, I guess, dystopia. There's a patina of dystopia, or the potential for dystopia in your work. And either there's been some sort of cataclysm, or there's potentially going to be a cataclysm. So the stakes are pretty high. It's not like, hello, we're going to make doilies and have tea kind of work.
Yeah, I do tend to write a lot of apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic kind of stuff. Like, it's weird. I'm a what did someone call it? An apocalyptimist. Like, I'm actually very optimistic about human nature, but I also, because of a history background, I'm sort of a realist as well. So a lot of my stuff is sort of like this small handful of people kind of screwing things up for everybody else, but most people are generally pretty good. And there's a lot of redemption themes, like people that were bad that, met the right person at the right time and are trying to claw their way out of it, or had some kind of realization and went, I'm on the wrong path. And and often a lot of my bad guys think they're the good guys while they're the bad guys. So a lot of their redemption is them realizing, oh crap, I've been playing for the wrong team,
Absolutely.
Where they thought they were kind of like saving the world, they found out, oh, and actually I'm serving a very dark master kind of thing, which is often how I think it happens. I mean, I find it interesting, like, that people want to, there's a certain subset of people that want to convince us that, all people are evil and, there's always darkness, human nature is terrible, blah, 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 blah. But if you look at actual history, that everything sort of belies that, like, you have to train human beings to kill. We don't naturally kill other people. It's actually been a kind of a huge thing over time, the science of teaching people how to kill other people. And it's evolved over time, and they've gotten very good at it now, obviously, especially in like the modern, United States military. They have that training down to an art to get people, because before, the shooting rates were down, they were like 16-17% of people would actually with the opportunity to kill another human being. And now I think it's up to like 80 or 70 or something like that, or maybe even higher than that now. But yeah, you have to teach people to do that. So I don't actually believe that human beings are inherently this or that or the other. It just, in my experience, that's not, the evidence doesn't bear that out.
That's a frightening statistic, actually, that you just said that 80% would be, wow.
Well, these are trained soldiers. I mean, the idea was to get, to get them to pull the trigger when they're faced with the enemy. And until Vietnam, I think Vietnam is when it really shifted. They changed the training tactics to have more like kind of like actual, I don't know if it was paintball. Now they use a lot of paintball, laser tag and that kind of thing, and a lot of video games that are simulated. So people get over it, like they gradually learn to get used to it. But it used to be you just threw a gun in someone's hand and then, they go out on the field and and I think in World War II, it was only like 20%, maybe even less, of people actually pulled the trigger because they hadn't been inured to, they hadn't been sort of numbed enough in the idea of killing another human. So they're staring at another human and they just wouldn't pull the trigger,
It sounds like a desensitization process
exactly.
that you're talking about.
Exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah. There's some really good books on it. It is frightening, that we would, go to these lengths to teach people to kill other people, but it also shows that that's not inherently part of our nature,
Oh, sure. I mean, and that's the thing. That's why PTSD in many ways exists, is because you witness those atrocities and there's no way you're okay with them. Even if you will kill, I guess, because you've been trained to do it. So many veterans have incredible PTSD for the rest of their lives because of that, because they're not okay with it. And
exactly. Yeah,
so I agree with you. I don't think it's our natural state to be able to kill. And I think not only that, but the more insidious part of it, of course, is to be at all okay with it. And that sort of gets us into a much,
the whole brainwashing end of it. Well, not brainwashing is even harsh, but I mean, a huge part of the training is convincing them they're the good guys,
right.
Because again, people don't want to kill people. So you have to teach them, like, not only, desensitize them, but you have to teach them that it's for the greater good,
Right.
So I play around a lot with those ideas. It's like the human mind is a wonderful thing, but it is very malleable in a lot of ways, and we're getting more and more sophisticated about how we mold brains, which is frightening in and of itself, but given, the potential for it in the wrong hands, it's really scary. So anyway, sorry, I'm going down a dark path even now. It's only 10 in the morning.
That's but that's the thing. That's all, to me, it's all part of your process of how you infuse your books with some of those dystopian elements, right? And that to me I'm fascinated by that, because I'm fascinated by how creative people create. And and that's part of not only your inspiration, but it sounds like it's part of your process, grabbing in all of these different things that you've read about and you've thought about, and infusing your writing with your thoughts about it and with some of your conclusions about it, which I think is phenomenal. But at the same time, what was it? Apocalyptimist? I think that's my friend JC, the Apocalyptimist. I think that's great. That's great.
Because I do have a lot of faith in human beings in terms of our, and I do think that inherently, we do strive for justice. We do just, we do want to be the good guys. And as long as we still continue to want to be the good guys, and most of us are going to do our best to be the good guys, it's just a matter of whether or not we get tricked into thinking, into, working someone else's agenda while we think we're being the good guys. But yeah, I think being a history buff and sort of fascinated by human nature, and like you said, the metaphysical and sort of all the different influences in us as humans is had a huge impact on my writing. I mean, I think that's why I write. It's almost like a brain drain in a way. It's like my way of processing all the things that I think about and obsess on. And most fiction writers I've found have certain themes that they tend to go back to again and again, like things that they sort of chew on, that are sort of their, I don't know if obsession is the right word, but we were kind of talking about this earlier. But yeah, just that thing that they want to understand and they want to wrap their heads around and they want to bring clarity to. It's like they want to understand it themselves. It's almost like the psych major that is trying to figure out what's going on in their own brain,
Absolutely. Psychologists often talk about how that is part of why they got into psychology, was because they had their own issues they were wrestling with. My mother was a licensed social worker before she retired. And as part of she got her master's in psychology and then master's in social work. And she said, as part of their training, before they could be counselors, they had to go through extensive therapy, in part because of that, because you need to know yourself, but also you need to understand how what your issues are, perhaps even what your demons are, will affect and impact the people you counsel. So
absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. And the same thing, I think that process in some ways goes for writers, only you have to do it yourself, because there is no one who's dictating to you that you're going to need to go to therapy. So instead you write.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I know a lot of people that write through different issues, you know what I mean? And some of the toughest times for creative writers, I think, is when they can't write for whatever reason. And, you sort of lose your main processing tool, which is really tough if you're somebody who kind of has learned to lean on that. And I'm definitely in that bucket. If I go too long without writing, I start to get kind of weird.
Yes, I get antsy. If I don't write, I get antsy. I start picking at my husband. Yeah.
I had a boyfriend that made me go write. It was hilarious. Like I'd start picking stupid fights with him, and he was like, "Okay, have you written today?" And I'm like, "No." And he's all, "Go in there, write an hour, come back out. If you still want to have this conversation, we'll have it." And like an hour later, I'd come out, "Sorry." It was always just me, like I just had too much backed up in the brain drain. And yeah, if I went and wrote for a couple hours, I was fine,
I love it. The writing process as therapist's couch. That's terrific.
Figured that out. I hadn't even, at that point in my life, I was in my 20s and I hadn't even figured that out at that point, but he sure had.
Well, and he saw it for sure. But let's talk about that a little bit. I'd love to talk about your process in coming up with your ideas and in fleshing out your ideas, and also in remaining so productive. I mean, you've written over 30 books. That's incredible. I'd love to talk a little bit about, if you could, about what that means to you. What is your process of daily writing?
I'm kind of in the middle of a fluctuation with it right now because, I lived in Thailand and Bangkok for 5 years. So I had a pretty solid schedule down there in terms of what I would do every day. Here, I just moved to Los Angeles in July. And then I had a whole bunch of stuff happen when I got here, like I had conferences and a bunch of things going on. So it took me a while to kind of get settled, get the apartment, figure out what this new schedule is. And then I just got a dog. So I haven't had a dog in a long time. So I'm figuring out how she fits into the schedule because she's still a puppy. So she needs quite a bit of kind of attention right now. I'm sure she'll chill out a little bit later. But then part of my reason for getting the puppy was to make sure I got enough walking in, because the other thing you got to worry about as a writer is it's very easy, if you're an obsessive type like I am, to sit for like 15 hours a day and not, take good care of your body. So I thought maybe a dog would help me with some balance in that, But generally speaking, I get up, I meditate, I work out. Now I'm getting up, I'm meditating, and then I'm taking the dog for a walk, and then I'm working out. And then I usually sit and read while I kind of have my first smoothie of the day kind of thing. And then I write, and I usually write sort of in chunks, and depending on where I am in a project, like if I'm at the very beginning of a project, I tend to only write for a few hours and then take a break and then do my thing. If I'm sort of in the middle or toward the end of a project and I know where it's going and I sort of see the finish line, I'll do like full on, like kind of like binge writing, where I'll write like 16,000 words in one day kind of thing. But most days that's sort of toward the end of projects, or if I'm on a deadline or something. But I'm a little bit bingey in my writing. Like this last week or so, I haven't written much. I've done a lot of admin work, but I haven't been doing a whole lot of writing. I mean, maybe 10,000 words in the past week, which for me is like nothing. But I know once I get, some of that is like, I just wrote 3 books in the Nick Vampire series. So I'm sort of switching gears to I'm going back to the Quentin Black series. So some of that is this gear switching. Some of it is the move. Some of it is getting the puppy. So I tend to sort of go up and down a little bit. I'm not one of those, I have friends that write 5,000 words every day, no matter what, like clockwork, and I don't tend to do that. I tend to be more of a 2,000 words, 10,000 words, 4,000 words, 8,000 words, so I'm not quite as consistent as some of my friends, but I'm a fast writer. So it sort of evens out, I think.
Here's hoping.
I mean, I have friends that are super prolific that are on that scheduled mode too. So I don't know who would end up writing the most in the end, but everybody's different. More and more, I think a lot of creative for me has been figuring out what I do and then pushing that, not trying to adopt someone else's method. So I, for years, would try to be a plotter, I would try to plot and outline, and it just didn't work for me. And it works awesome for friends of mine. They write so well that way. And it just didn't work for me. So at a certain point, I just had to abandon it. And kind of the same with the daily word counts. I've just found I'm a bingey writer, And so as long as I know that and I have a deadline in my head and make sure I hit enough of those bingey days to hit my deadline, then I'm usually okay,
Where do your deadlines come from? What's the...
It depends. I had pre-orders on the Vampire Detective Midnight books. So those were hard deadlines. Those were set by Amazon, basically. If I didn't hit them, I would lose my pre-order status for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to do that because you don't want to do that if you can help it. So I really needed to hit those deadlines because after a certain point, they won't let you switch the thing. You actually lose, they penalize you if you miss your deadlines. So those were set pretty much in stone, and they were right when I was moving. So that was a little hectic. I had to kind of plan that out pretty well to make sure I hit them. This book, I gave myself more breathing room because I knew I would just be moving to LA, and I knew I would be switching gears after doing 3 books in a row in a different series. So I gave myself a little more time than I normally do. So that's why I'm not too concerned that I've taken this week and kind of, eased into it. But yeah, often I do, I publicize when books are coming out and stuff, and I don't like changing those if I can help it because, readers get kind of bummed. And if I have a pre-order, especially, I can't. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me that you want to keep all of that, keeping your reader satisfied, first of all, of course, but also, these are the the benchmarks, if you will, that you sort of the milestones that you set for yourself, and you want to keep them. I have something as you were talking that kind of made me go, you're making this switch between the Detective Midnight and the Quentin Black, going back to the Quentin Black's, the next book is Quentin Black's story. What has to happen inside your head in order to switch between the two?
It depends. If it's just been like one book, then it's not as big of a deal. But I'm noticing how different the tone is between the two series. Like they're actually pretty radically different, because Nick is a very different character than Quentin Black. They're very different people. So a lot of it is getting back into the headspace of the characters, and in this case, because I left the Quentin Black series with a lot going on. Like there was a number of sort of pretty big cliffhanger-y type things that happened in the end of the last book. I actually went back and read that book because which isn't something I normally do, but this time I felt like I should, just to make sure I had it all straight in my head and that I knew exactly where I left it and where everybody's mental states were. And because some of it is just remembering, you don't want to start off the next book with them, freaking out about something when they come to peace about it at the end of the previous book, kind of thing. So some of it was just getting back into where were they at psychologically when that book ended, what had they sort of decided about what was going to happen next. And so in this case I went back and read the last two books, because they're shorter novel in between. So there was Too Black with Love, which was book 10, and there was kind of a 10.5 novella. It's not actually a novella, it's a full-length novel, but it's slightly shorter. It's like 90,000 words or something, which is in that series is maybe it's 80,000, but it's a little bit shorter than the normal, like 100,000 for that series. So I reread that one too, Black Dreams. And so, and then I was able to start pretty easily because I was like, okay, I'm back in their headspace. And, so some of it has just been, dealing with the puppy this week. She's been sick and,
oh, no.
So she's been a little bit distracting. Yeah. She came out of the rescue with some kennel cough. So she was okay for most of it, but then she had 2 days where she was out. She was kind of like a little kid with a fever,
Oh, poor baby.
Yeah. She was pretty much down for the count, but she's better now. She's good. And she's getting her last parvo shot tomorrow, so I can start taking her for real walks, which will be nice.
Yay. I'm going to have to put a picture of her up on the show notes just so, that I have her. That's wonderful.
She's a husky though, so she's a handful.
Oh, I understand. My last dog was a husky and definitely was a handful, and he was not into being left alone for sure.
Oh, no, she's not happy about that either. She's pretty good though. I mean, I have used the crate with her just because she's a puppy, and I'm a little nervous about leaving her alone because I don't want her chewing on, power cables or whatever. So she is crate trained for when I'm not here, but she definitely doesn't like it.
Oh, I'm sure.
She's okay with the crate when I'm here. In fact, I was laughing about crate training with her because all it was crate and she was inside it, So she likes her little den, but she doesn't like me leaving. So
yeah, that can be tough for huskies for sure. When we got ours, the first night we had Hatha, we had a crate. We thought, he'll be fine. We put him in a crate. He was in one of those big metal crates against one side of the wall of the living room. And when we came home, about an hour and a half later, the crate was on the other side of the room.
Oh, wow.
Wait. I'm not done.
Compared to that.
The front, the all metal front door of the crate was bent more than 90 degrees, and the dog was on the couch. So,
she's way chill compared to that.
we did not try to crate him after that. Absolutely not. But before we go too far afield, as far as talking about dogs, you were talking about the mindset of the characters in book 10 before you went into, or book 10.5, I guess, before you went into the next book. Can you talk a little bit about the books themselves, like the Quentin Black stories with Mary Fox? Can you say a little bit about what they are? Because I'd love to get that out there. Who are these people? What are the stories about?
So Quentin Black is actually kind of an unusual character. He was born in the Bridge and Sword world, which is a world where they basically know that there are seers. So the idea with Bridge and Sword is that it follows our history pretty closely until about the turn of the century. And then there's what they call first contact, where they realize that human beings aren't alone in the world, that there's actually a whole second race that lives there with them. And so all these things happen as a result of that. Initially, there's all these like sort of like peace, love, and all get together well. And then of course, you know, they realized the commercial potential of seers. So they started enslaving them and selling them, and there was a black market, and it ended up sort of becoming this quasi-slavery type situation. So Quentin Black grew up in that as a kid. He was a slave. He actually grew up in a slave camp in Thailand. And he ends up sort of falling through a door and ends up in a different version of Earth. So that gets into the whole sort of meta world of Bridge and Sword, which is that there's these dimensional portals and different versions of Earth. And so it makes it kind of fun from a writer's perspective, because, you know, there's all these different sort of permutations of Earth and different ways that it could exist. So Black comes in, he's kind of, he's a weird mishmash of things, because he was basically a teenager when he came through the door. He didn't look like a teenager, he looked like an adult, but in seer years, because they lived to be about 700 years old, he was an adolescent, more or less, you know, and it was in the 50s in America. So he came in, and he also thought he was the only seer in the world for a very long time that he lived there. So he's kind of this weird, insecure, slightly PTSD-ish with trauma issues, because his family basically abandoned him as a kid. They sold him in order to get themselves off the hook. They sold one of their kids, and he ended up being that kid. So he's kind of this sort of weird, insecure mess, but he's also extremely cocky and kind of a dick. You know, he's a little bit of a social like weirdo in a lot of ways, because he's never really had to care that much what humans thought. He makes all this money on the stock market because, you know, he's a seer and nobody else has that ability. So he has all these psychic abilities don't have, and he thinks he's the only one. So he capitalizes on it like crazy. And so this is where the book starts. The books start when he's already basically a billionaire and doing private investigative work, because he was in the military for years in America too. So he fought in the Vietnam War, and he fought in the Korean War. And so there's a few people that kind of know who he is, but he's basically sort of kept this low profile kind of like rich guy thing going. So he's a kick to write. He's really fun to write. He's almost like part of the reason I initially created Miri as his foil is because he's a little bit of a Sherlockian character in that he's extremely intelligent, and he's also a total weirdo. So to write from his point of view would actually make it harder to see him clearly, because he doesn't think like we do. So I needed like a relatable perspective on him, and I needed it to be outside of him. You know what I mean? So in some ways, Miri in the beginning kind of functions as his Watson. Like she starts off as kind of like, I met this weird guy and he's really smart, but he's a little psycho. Like he might be a murderer, and like he could be a sociopath, but then every now and then he seems kind of cool. So I'm not really sure what his deal is, and he keeps hitting on me, and so he's just kind of this, you know, sort of, and so he's a lot of fun to write, because he just blurts out whatever the hell he's thinking at any given moment, and he also doesn't really think like we do. So a lot of the things that bug him are not things that would necessarily bug us, you know? So, and Nick, you know, Naoko from the Vampire Detective Midnight is much more of a straight guy. You know, he was life, and then through a number of different circumstances that happen, he gets turned into a vampire. And so he's sort of like a reluctant, you know, non-human in some ways. Whereas like Quentin, he's not really like, he doesn't think he's superior to people, but he very much embraces his difference. You know what I mean? Like he's very proud of who he is. And at the same time, he's also very pro-human, because it turns out there are other seers on that world, and a lot of them are not so pro-human. And so then you sort of realize that he's actually much more, he's much less racist than many others of his kind that were much more deeply traumatized from that other version of Earth, you know? And some of whom actually want revenge and stuff on where they are. So the Quentin Black books have evolved. They actually started off as sort of one-off mystery novels, each of the books, but it's become this much more complex overall arc that's going on between sort of seers and humans as more and more seers kind of show up in that world. So far, at least, the Vampire Detective Midnight books are much more just mysteries, you know? So they're sort of one-off mysteries, and they have just a very different, much more noirish tone. Like Quentin Black almost does a kind of dark humor tone a lot of the time to it. it's serious, and there's a pretty serious love story in it, but there's also quite a bit of humor in it just because of who Black is, So switching tracks on that it's just hard to explain. They just have, the two characters just feel very different when I'm writing them, Like Nick can be funny too, but he's funny in a different way. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, he's much more kind of a grumpy old man in some ways, He's got that kind of personality. Like, he's almost like a detective from one of those old, detective novels where he's just, he's kind of like just sort of a cynical old man. And his partners on the NYPD are always calling him an old man because he grumps about this and that. And he watches old movies, and, they all think he's just a weirdo.
Oh, well, people are going to have to read the books to find out more about him. But I can imagine, she walked into my office on a pair of sticks that men dream about.
There's a little bit of that. I mean, it's a cyberpunky version of that for sure. It's probably more Blade Runner than, one of the old,
than the old dime store noir books.
Yeah, the old dime store novels. But it's definitely got a bit of that vibe for sure,
Well, and, you mentioned Blade Runner, and that just perks my ears up because that's my favorite movie of all time. So anytime that movie is mentioned, I'm like, oh, yay, that's the best. So I did want to shift gears just a little bit because I love that you talked about the books, but I want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, into being a full-time author. Like,
sure.
you made that shift, and it took a lot of courage to go, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. So could you talk a little bit about what mindset you were in and perhaps what mindset shift you had to make in order to do that? How did you set it up? What went into creating this lifestyle where you could do it?
Again, it's been sort of an evolution because the industry is changing so fast, and also just I had to go through a massive learning curve that I still feel like I'm in the middle of, honestly. But when I initially left, really making very much as a writer. I just sort of put a few things out there, but it was very much at that point, where indie publishing was first coming out. So it's almost like throw the spaghetti against the wall to see what would stick. And I didn't do a very good job with marketing initially. In fact, I did almost no marketing at all, which you could almost get away with back then, but not really, especially with the kind of stuff I write, which is very, cross-genre and doesn't fit easily into a specific niche where I would have, made money a lot easier if I'd written like down the line urban fantasy or something that was pretty much, closer to people's expectations and in terms of the genres. So a lot of it was just sort of me being a little burnout on corporate work and wanting to just try to learn this industry. So I think this, I know you know this, but I basically just picked up and moved to India. And I had I had no debt, which was nice. I had some savings from my corporate job, since I lived pretty frugally when I lived in Oregon. So yeah, I just basically went to India where I think my living expenses were like $400 a month or something like that. So it gave me a lot of room to kind of get my feet wet and figure out sort of, my schedule and can I write full time and, am I going to do the work and, and really just trying to learn about the industry. And I made so many mistakes. I mean, the first year I was there, I was just kind of in this like, wee-hoo, and I just write whatever I felt like, which is nice and it's freeing. But in terms of building a career, it's not very practical. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't follow any particular track. Every book I wrote was different. Like, I'd wait months between releases and then I'd release that were all totally unrelated and I wouldn't market any of them. I didn't spend enough on real cover art, frankly. Like I thought, I can do my own kind of thing because I'd gotten advice from people that, you can do your own, it's really cheap. And so I just got PowerPoint and tried to do my own, but I'm not a designer and I'm certainly not a commercial designer. And I didn't know genres well enough to even be able to peg the tropes and the genres for the cover art at that point. So that was a big, I made tons and tons of mistakes, I guess is my point. So eventually for family reasons, I ended up going home for a while. And that's when it really hit, I'm not making enough to really, live here in America, like comfortably, like it was really, at that point, I was just barely making enough to kind of barely live in Oregon, but I couldn't really experiment with marketing. I still didn't have much of a budget in terms of cover art and all that kind of stuff. So in the end, I decided to go back to Asia, this time going to Bangkok, which is more pricey. I mean, it definitely costs more to live there than it did to live in India. But it still gave me a lot of wiggle room in terms of budget and stuff. And that's where I really kind of dug in. That's when I started writing the Quentin Black books. And my brand started to kind of emerge in terms of like, I did start thinking more strategically, like, well, this world is kind of linked to this world. And in some ways those can cross feed one another. And so I started thinking, maybe not in terms of exactly what I was writing, but I was starting to think more strategically about the stuff that I was writing. And I started to focus more, like, instead of writing like a kid's book here and a YA book here and, you know, a nonfiction piece here and like, you know, spending a lot of time on blogging and stuff, I thought, you know, I have this sort of core set of stuff that I paranormal, supernatural suspense with some mystery and some romance. And it is kind of centered on this world of seers and stuff. So I'm just going to push that for a while and kind of work that into my brand and really kind of develop my voice in that area. So again, it just sort of evolved. And while I was there, I decided to invest in cover art. And so I got my brand, you know, looking more consistent across the board. And I'm still kind of in the process of that. I have two backlist series that I need to clean up and rewrite and sort of fit into that world and that brand, including with cover art, but also in terms of content to some degree. Because again, you know, people get used to a certain heat level from your books. So if you have books where, you know, the sex scenes happen offline, and then some that don't, you know, it's just better to have kind of a consistent product where people sort of know what to expect to some degree. So this has just been like I said, with my writing itself, it's been sort of an evolution for me. And I feel like I'm still way behind a ton of other authors that are way more market savvy than I am. Like, for example, I really need to take a class in like things like Facebook ads and things like that. Like I need to learn more about just some of the basic tools of marketing, and, you know, because so much of this stuff is online marketing. Like you really are learning about, you know, online commerce. I mean, that's to a large degree, you're an online business person. So.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I listen to podcasts and I've taken some classes on those things, because nowadays, in order to, if you don't have a brick and mortar shop somewhere or a job where there's a physical location, a lot of stuff is sort of from your laptop, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I always joke I'm a publishing company from a single laptop, basically, because that's sort of what I've been doing all along. But yeah, at this point, I feel like I really need that. Like, it's funny because my background is business. You know, I came from the corporate environment, so I have a business background, but publishing is such a unique and bizarre industry, and it's morphing so quickly all the time. It really is almost like starting over in some ways. And it took me a while to kind of really orient my business hat around writing, because it had always been a hobby that I did alongside business.
Right.
So to kind of change my mindset in that degree, that took a while. Surprisingly, like it probably took me 2 years to really start to view this as my business in a way that was very productive for me, you know. Some part of me still had this real idealistic, you know, oh, I'll just wing it. If it's good enough, it'll float to the top. And, you know, that's all great and well, but it's not really how it works. You know, like, I mean, it'd be nice if it worked that way, you know, that if people just organically found stuff, but they don't, you know, you really do have to market. You have to know what it is you're selling. And it's your responsibility as the creator to tell people what you do and who you are and what your voice is. And, people can't find on their own. There's just too much out there now, you know, not just in writing, but, you know, movies. And I mean, you're competing with everything now. You're not just competing with writing, you're competing with video games and, you know, movies and television. And I mean, it's sort of this giant online content pool, you know, and you're trying to find a way, not just, you know, scream loud enough that people see you, but just to convey what it is you actually do, to see if you can find the right people, the ones that will actually like what you do.
Exactly. And that is a lot of it, is who, you know, what are the people, what do they want? And are you offering them something they will want? You know, because if you don't know the first one, then there's no way to answer that question at all. But even if you do want that even if you do know what that first one is, you might not have what they want. And then you have to search for the group that will, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, it's almost like which people, because the market is so huge when you really look at it like that. Like you really have to figure out, well, what do I have to offer that's different, you know, than what other people are doing? And what do I have to offer that's the same as what other people are doing, you know? Because it's not enough to just be different. Like the, you know, the conventional wisdom is, you know, the more original, the better. That's actually not true. People don't want stuff that's genuinely original. They want stuff that they know, that they feel pretty safe in buying, you know, and that they think they'll like. So quite often people go to the familiar. They don't go to the brand new. You know, the really big things that hit off are generally something that's a twist on something that's already familiar. You know, it's not something that's completely of whole cloth new. Like that's just not really how people work. And increasingly the big media companies are looking for, you know, those combinations of new but old, you know. I think actually it's a really great time to be creative, because there are quite a few venues right now that are looking for genuinely original content. Like I'm speaking mostly of the streaming services. So like Netflix and Amazon and, you know, channel soon. I heard CBS has one that's starting up. Those are big content sucks, and they all want stuff that's pretty different. You know, they actually are looking for things that are pretty new. But if you look at big publishing houses and stuff, they generally are run by the sales department. The sales department doesn't look ahead to what might be big in 20 years. They look back to what was, you know, what works. You know, what's a repeatable success that we can do? They want a lack of, you know, unpredictability. As much as they can sort of, you know, script out what they think will do well, that's better for them. So they really want a repeatable formula as much as they can, which is why genre fiction does well. You know, generally there's a certain format and a certain set of tropes that you're following, and people are looking for that, who like that kind of thing. But I mean, this is sort of me going off, sorry, but it's just stuff that I think about, because I think there's a lot of mythology given to creative people about, you know, what sells and why it sells, and you know, it's all because it's all brand new and original, and a lot of it's timing, and a lot of it really is giving people what they want. And you know, I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. And it's really interesting that you said that, because in watching television or reading books, so much of it is, I'm not going to say it's regurgitated, but it's definitely a new take on the same old, same old. Like when you said that these streaming services want something new, but then you look at Netflix and they just released last year or the year before the Gilmore Girls 15 years later or whatever, or the Tom Clancy novels got a new series with the Jack Ryan show, or I think it's called just Jack Ryan. So even if it's kind of new, because for example, Jack Ryan, they went back to him being a younger man rather than the Harrison Ford movies, for example, Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, et cetera, et cetera. They re-envisioned it, they changed it, but if someone hears, oh, Tom Clancy, oh, Jack Ryan, you kind of know what you're going to expect, right? You know what to expect. So
you don't want to minimize risk, and there's a lot of money involved, so I kind of get where they're coming from. But it does create, there are still more openings for creative, like genuinely creative stuff than there used to be, I would argue. I mean, you look at things like Stranger Things, and even things like Always Be My Maybe, I think it was called, which was, I mean, again, it's a rom-com, so there's nothing new about a rom-com, but they are taking some risks and doing some unusual things, which is kind of nice to see from a creative perspective, because, you know, for a while, you really didn't see a ton of that. Like it really was kind of like a lot of, you know, how many different versions of CSI can we do? And, you know, like, you know, it really didn't change that much. But I do think that television has become a little bit more interesting of late. But no, you're right. I mean, even in there, they're going to go for the most like risk-free things that they can go for, you know?
Sure. Well, and it's funny when you said that about Stranger Things. I don't recall exactly what I said Stranger Things was when I first saw it, but it was something like Poltergeist meets The Goonies meets Ghostbusters or something. And it was very 80s.
You know?
Yeah. And not, that's not a bad thing because you're
No.
catching, you're catching the nostalgia vibe. And I think I watched Stranger Things season 1. I did, but at the same time, they took it in a slightly different direction, but you're like, oh, look, it's 3 boys and they're trying to find their friend and they've got this girl with them. And it's like, okay, well, there's Goonies, so
Yeah.
it was
No, it's true. Yeah. Or it's like that Super 8 movie or whatever it was, the one that J.J. Abrams made.
Right.
And I think Steven Spielberg that was almost an actual homage. I think it was an homage to Steven Spielberg.
Who, deserves homages. That's fine.
Oh, yeah. I was a huge fan. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with his stuff. So, I totally get it. I mean, I have a bit of that nostalgia too, although it's funny when you see the movies now, you see them very differently than you did back then. But yeah, when I was a kid, I just loved all that stuff. So I totally get it. Like we're all the people in our 40s now. So it makes sense that, they'd be kind of finding stuff that they would hope our kids would like, but also, try to get the adults in on it by, evoking the nostalgia and stuff. I mean, even having, what's her name in it, a Winona Ryder in it is pretty funny,
Yes, but see, and for me, David Harbour is what it's all about. I adore, as an actor, as a man, I adore him.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it's really interesting what you just said. Just sparked something for me, and I'd love to get your take on it. This idea of nostalgia. Normally, what we understand as far as marketing, because I do want to talk about how you market your books to your fans. Normally, what I understand about marketing is that there's that 18 to 49 demo, and often it's the 18 to 24 or 18 to 29 demo. Those are the people who are going to spend the money. But it's always interesting to me because who has the most disposable income? I would imagine it's people in their mid 40s into their 60s. Like those are the people who've probably gotten some money put away and are now in a position where they could have a streaming service or whatever it is that they want to buy. They might have more disposable income than someone who's got a bunch of student loan debt. So it's interesting to me that something like Stranger Things does sort of try to attract that young audience, but also for the nostalgia factor will attract somebody who's in their 40s or 50s like I am. So it's really interesting. What do you think about that? Do you think that there's any truth to that, or do you think I'm way out in left field?
No, I think they try to, I think visual media is different than books, but books, it really depends on the genre. Like you wouldn't say that 18 to 24 is the highest paying, that's definitely not the aim, but for a lot of movies it is, boys 18 to 24 or whatever used to be the main target for movies, although I do think that's starting to change. But for books, absolutely not. If you write romance, it's all women and, middle-aged women. A lot of YA now is aimed at middle-aged women. What I write is kind of a mishmash because I've got a male audience to some degree too, although it's still predominantly women, probably because I have a lot of romancy stuff in my books. But yeah, it really depends on the medium and stuff. Television, I don't know how they market that. I just assumed that they try to capture the nostalgia vibe for Stranger Things because, they're like people our age are the ones that have the kids that are teenagers now, for the most part, and even younger because people have kids later now. But yeah, I don't know. I imagine every place has their market guys like crunching the numbers on every show, hoping to catch different demographics. That's probably part of it is part of the pitching process. I'm sure when they're trying to get something made, they probably try to show, well, we'll capture this group, and this will be our primary audience, but we're also hoping to catch these peripheral audiences because of X, Y, and Z, or this star, this trope, or whatever. I don't really do that so much with books. I don't even come close to having that level of sophistication. I tend to write what I write and then try to figure out how to market it, which is not the best way to do it if you want to make a lot of money. Like I have a lot of friends that are much more marketing minded than I am. And they generally, they plan out series based on the market and they make a lot more money because of that. A lot of what I was talking about with marketing isn't necessarily something I do. It's just something I know that works. So, if you want to make the transition to be a full-time writer, honestly, I mean, this is just me putting on my business hat. You're better off money-wise if you study the market, figure out where the gaps are, and find something you want to write that fits into that. the conventional wisdom is that's just the way to make money as a writer, just like it is with most businesses, you know. I don't happen to do that for, you know, various reasons, probably just because I write for slightly different reasons. I may have to do more of that if I continue to live in the United States and, you know, too weird or whatever, or I may take a part-time job or something. I don't know. But yeah, if you want to make a really good living at writing, it's getting increasingly competitive. So you can either do what I do, which is carve out a niche, which takes a lot of time. You're basically getting, you know, one reader at a time kind of thing. And you don't have huge hits, but you gradually grow a fan base, which is what I've been doing. Or you can try to, you know, capture the mainstream audience by really targeting markets and, you know, being much more sort of business and marketing savvy about what it is you write. And that doesn't mean you have to compromise your art. Like a lot of people take that to mean that, you know, you don't care about your art or whatever. But the people I know that do that, they find niches that they really genuinely like, you know. They don't just pick any niche. They don't just pick some genre that they would never read and don't like. They look at what, you know, the market says, and then they go, okay, well, out of those, I really like these kind of books, so I'll write these, you know. It's like they marry the two things. They try to find something that they enjoy. And then they also follow sort of the trope maps. Like they write stuff that fits the reader expectations of that group. So someone that wanted to definitely make a living as a writer and wanted to start off making decent money, that would be a much probably more strategic way to go, especially now because it's getting so much more competitive, you know.
Absolutely. Well, within that competition, you still have over 30 books and you have a major fan base. How, you know, you're a best-selling author, which I think is fabulous. How do you do it? How do you connect with your fans? How do you market your books?
Wow. Well, I'm sort of in a bit of a flux with that right now. A lot of Amazon advertising, and I'm actually moving away from that just because the ROI isn't really there for that. So I'm doing more kind of experiments on Facebook and Instagram. And I've always had a group of, not always, but fairly recently, I've had this group of like a reader group on Facebook. So I interact with a lot of my readers on there. And I also have an author fan page. I do a little bit on Goodreads, but not much, honestly. Most of it's on Facebook and some on Twitter and some on Instagram. In terms of actually talking to readers and stuff, and also a lot of emails. I still get a fair few emails and stuff, and so I communicate with a lot of people that way.
Do you keep a mailing list? Like, do you have an email list of your readers?
Yes, I do have a newsletter. Sorry, I should have mentioned that too. Yeah, I have a newsletter. I have I also have an advanced reader team. So I have a small group that does, you know, sort of advanced reading for stuff for my books. So they are able to get the word out like right before a new release and that kind of thing. And they write reviews right when it comes out and that kind of thing. But yeah, I have a newsletter. I'm fairly inconsistent with mine compared to some people. Some people have like a set day. They do it every month kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Mine more is whenever I have news, you know, so sometimes they'll get like, you know, one every other week. Sometimes they'll get 2 in 1 week if something happens or something. And for the most part, they get like about 1 a month, you know. I try not to bombard people unless I really have something to tell them. But yeah, I generally try to, you know, give an update on where I'm at in terms of what I'm working on writing wise. I try not to, a lot of people do what are called swaps where they promote other people's books a lot. Mm-hmm. Or you do swaps with someone else. I went through a phase of that, but if I haven't read the books, I don't really like doing that anymore because I had readers kind of come at me and say, oh, I read that book you recommended and it wasn't very good or blah, 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 you know, and it's not that I, you know, don't trust other authors to be good, but at this point, it kind of really hit me that if I put something in my newsletter, they're taking that as an endorsement. Right. And so I should make sure that it actually fits my audience before I say, I think you guys will like this. Right. Because it's not that they're bad, but some of them just weren't good fits for my audience. You know, it just isn't the kind of stuff that they like. So I'm backing off that a little bit too, even though that is kind of a nice thing to do to be able to, you know, support other writers and stuff. I mean, I'm doing it where I, you know, if I get a chance to read the book and I think, oh yeah, my readers would like this, then I'll definitely do it. But it's tricky, you know. I mean, you think you're just putting something out there to tell people about it, and that's not how your readers take it. They take it, you know, oh, she's read this and she knows it's good and that we'll like it, you know. And it's like, oh, not always, you know. Right.
And that can be tricky because that one of the things that's good about having a mailing list and having people who know your work and love it is that they trust you. And that kind of thing can erode that trust if it's not consistent in that way. So
exactly. Yeah. You don't want to screw the trust of your readers. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to be on the review team, how would they do it? What would they need to do?
I'm pretty open with it, actually. I have I don't advertise it really, but I have a sign up sheet on my website.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one of the tabs on my website. I think it's actually on my website. It just says review team.
Uh-huh. Well,
and it has a list of sort of, what sort of the expectations are and blah, blah, blah. And then they just fill out the form at the bottom. And, as long as they're a good behaving member of that team, I keep them on there. If I, catch them doing weird things like, giving ARCs to people or things show up on weird pirate sites or whatever, then I'll boot them out. But for the most part, if they're a good behaving member of that team, then, it's all good.
Oh, wonderful. Well, speaking of your website, how about you give me the whole list? Where can people find you? jcandrijeski.com, I think, is the main website, but what else? Where?
Well, right now I'm mostly publishing exclusively with Amazon. I made a decision to do that so that I had a lot of people asking me about the Kindle Unlimited program that they could read, on a subscription basis. So I thought, I probably won't stay on there forever, but I am gonna give it a chance and see if I can see what those readers think of it. So I made the decision just to go onto Amazon alone for at least for a while. So right now that's the main place to find at least my ebooks. Paperbacks should be just about everywhere. I think those are sold on most other outlets, and I make most of my books paperback. So that's an option for people that don't want to buy from Amazon. And the other thing I've told people that I'll do is if they have an e-reader that doesn't read the Amazon format, if they send me a receipt from Amazon that they bought it there, I'll send them the format they need. So I just can't break my contract with Amazon, which is why I require the receipt. I'm not doing it to be a jerk. It's just they require every sale to go through them as part of, for them. So so this is sort of the compromise I've worked out. If they buy it from them, then I've honored the exclusive contract, but I can still give them an EPUB version if they want to read on their, Nook, or if they have a different kind of reading device. So
right. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So that's the website. What about, you said Instagram you're on also?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. Almost everything I'm at JC Andrijeski. I just tried to keep it really simple. So I'm that on Twitter. I'm JC Andrijeski on Facebook, both my personal page and my author page. And then the Rebel Base is the name of my reader group on Facebook. And you can find that through my author page as well, which is jcandrijeski.com. Or yeah, JC Andrijeski. Also, if you go to my website, I've got all the social media stuff on there too.
Oh, okay. So that's easy.
Yeah,
so
I have a tiny presence on YouTube. I haven't done much. I've done a few book trailers, and that's pretty much it. At some point, I want to go back to doing some vlogging because I used to do some of that, just to talk about the world and things like that. It's just been a time issue, frankly. But now that I'm sort of settling into LA, I definitely want to do more of that kind of thing.
Oh, and you're going to have great vistas to do it from if you're in LA, which is great.
Yeah, and it's always fun in a new place too, and annoy people with my dog. And all that.
Dogs are not annoying. I refuse to believe that. So tell me, what's the next thing? What's the next upcoming release?
The next upcoming release is going to be the next Quentin Black book. So it's going to, Black of Hearts is the name so far. I just ordered the cover for it, so I guess that's fairly final. And at this point, you probably would want to start at least back by book 4-ish, or, you could start at the very beginning, but they're pretty quick reads. And at this point, there's a lot going on. You could actually probably read this one as a standalone too. Most of them work pretty well as standalones, but you just would miss out on some of the overall kind of arc in terms of the main, the wider storyline versus, the smaller arc of the book itself. So yeah, that's next.
Okay.
And then after that, I'm probably going to go back to Vampire Detective Midnight and do another one of those. Although we'll see. Sometimes I like doing books in kind of, in the same series in clusters. So depending on where this one ends up, I may actually just do another Quentin Black book after this.
And let me ask you, just so that if someone wants to read them all in order, the order they are in on your website on the books page is the order to read them in. So top left all the way across, that's how they should read them.
Oh, in the books page?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the series, you can really read any series first. There's no one series that you have to start with.
No. I mean let's say if I'm looking at the Quentin Black books, you have
yeah,
black and white, black as night.
Yeah, it would go left to right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
and they're all numbered, so those are pretty easy. Also,
Good.
if you go to the series page for each of the books, so if you do the drop-down menu and go into the series, at the bottom of those pages, I have a recommended reading order for each.
Oh, perfect.
So that should make it easy too. Because I finally started doing that because I had a couple shorts in there and people want to know when to read the shorts because the main books are all numbered. So that was pretty straightforward. But there's some little like novellas and things like that sort of fill in little gaps here and there. So I decided just to create this just to make it easier.
Oh, that's good. Because reading series for me and not knowing which order is best can make my head swim. So it's really good that you did that. You did that.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm so grateful you took the time to talk about your work and your art. I'm really happy that we got a chance to do this. And I wanted to ask you, is there anything else that you would like my listeners to know about you or your work, what's coming up, what you're most excited about? I would love to hear that.
That's a good question. That's a great question. I was actually just thinking about this today because I'm kicking around an idea for a new series again. Probably not till next year. In fact, definitely not till next year at this point. But yeah, no, I'm trying to think because I don't know if your audience is mostly creative types that want to, do their own writing or if it's more reader types. But I'd say if you're a creative person, just go for it. And just, there's so many resources out there now that can help you learn and find your place in things and not worry so much about being exactly like everyone else, but figure out, like I said, what works for you and then just find ways to push that, rather than trying to stick yourself into a round hole if you're a square peg. And from the reader perspective, I don't know. It's hard for me to say. Obviously I want everyone to love my stuff, but I know it's, everybody's got different tastes, so I'm never offended when people don't. But yeah, if you like kind of smart, gritty, unusual characters and very character-driven books with usually a pretty strong love story in it, then you might like my stuff. So.
I dare say you will like your stuff. Yeah, I mean, your stuff is great. So
so much. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm going to want to do, of course, is I'm going to leave links to your website and your various social media and probably the book order thing, because that's to me, that's very important. What order should I be reading these in? Because otherwise I'll get lost. So I'm going to do that. And plus I want a picture of your dog for the show notes page for sure.
I have a couple on Facebook, but let me know if you want me to send one.
Yeah, well, no, but also bonus points if it's you and her. That would be ideal.
Yeah, I think I have one with her like sprawled on my lap, and you can see me smiling, but that's about it.
That would be great. That would be great. Husky lovers unite. So anyway, I again thank you so much, and I am going to be very excited to have this episode come out. It's going to come out in a few weeks. And if you're listening to it live, then you know that it came out today. Good for you. And if you're listening to it a couple of days after it came out, then hey, come and find JC Andrijeski. Thank you so much, JC, for joining me today on the Creative Mindset Podcast. If you have questions about what you've heard today, I am sure JC would be delighted to hear from you about her work and about the worlds that she's built in more than 31 books. And remember, if you want to write your book, all you have to do to get started is to download the complete workbook so that you can start writing your book. You can grab it at the show notes page, download it, and begin your writer's journey today. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am thrilled, as always, that you are part of the Creative Mindset community. If you have questions for me, if you want to share this episode, please do get in touch. Let me know what you're thinking about, how you are trying to get your stuff done so that you can go do your own thing. Until next time, I send you all of my love. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and please tell your friends about the community we're building here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright Isolde Trachtenberg 2019. Today's music was from Kevin MacLeod, Laser Groove, and Ave Marimba, brought to you by Creative Commons License 3.0. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, I send you all of my love.